Hello, and welcome back to Shadow Storyteller. Before we begin tonight's tale, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments so you won't miss any of our late night stories that are best heard before sleep. Now, let me take you into something that begins with an ordinary setting, but slowly unravels into something far less ordinary. This story is titled, A Call from the Old Payphone in Austin, Texas. It was a mild evening in late October, the kind of night when the air carries a faint chill, but not enough to make you shiver. The time was just past 9:30 p.m., and the streets around East 6th Street in downtown Austin were unusually quiet for a Friday night. The bars had just started to fill, yet a sense of emptiness lingered in the back streets, where dim orange lamps flickered above cracked sidewalks. Daniel Harris, a 34-year-old freelance photographer from London, had flown into Texas only 2 days earlier. He was staying in a modest Airbnb on Chicon Street, not far from the old railway line. Earlier that night, he had been out capturing long, exposure shots of neon signs around the city. By chance, or perhaps fate, he wandered further away from the crowded streets, finding himself near an abandoned corner store, its paint peeling, its windows covered in grime. And there, against the wall, stood something he had not seen in years, a payphone. Its metal body was dented, the receiver dangling loosely, the cord twisted as though someone had been spinning it nervously. The glass pane around it was scratched with initials and dates long forgotten. Daniel paused, raised his camera, and decided it would make the perfect photograph for his Lost Americana series. Just as he adjusted the focus and pressed the shutter, the silence of the night was broken by an unexpected sound. The payphone began to ring. At first, he thought it was a trick of his imagination. Who would call a payphone in 2023? Let alone one that looked like it hadn't worked in decades. Yet the metallic chime persisted, sharp and insistent, echoing down the empty street. Daniel lowered his camera, his pulse quickening. He glanced around. There was no one, only the faint hum of a neon beer sign from across the road and the distant strum of a guitar from a nearby bar. Curiosity tugged at him. Against his better judgment, he reached for the receiver. The plastic was cold, almost damp, as though it had been waiting. "Hello," Daniel spoke softly, his accent cutting through the static. There was a pause, then the sound of heavy breathing on the other end. The silence stretched long enough that Daniel considered hanging up. And then finally, a woman's voice, trembling low, with a hint of urgency. "Is this Michael?" she whispered. Daniel froze. His name wasn't Michael. His instinct was to correct her, to explain she had the wrong number. But something about her tone stopped him. It wasn't the voice of someone making a mistake. It was the voice of someone desperate. The line crackled, and the woman spoke again, this time more insistent. "Michael, please, you promise me. Don't leave me here." Daniel's breath caught. He turned slowly, scanning the dark street behind him, as though expecting to see someone watching. The lamps flickered, and for a second, he thought he saw a shadow move at the far end of the block. "Who is this?" Daniel finally asked, his voice quieter than before. But the woman didn't answer directly. Instead, she whispered something that made his skin crawl. "They know you're here. You need to come back before midnight." The line went dead. Daniel stood frozen, the receiver still pressed to his ear. The street seemed even quieter than before, the air heavier, as though it was holding its breath. He replaced the receiver slowly, his mind racing. He told himself it must have been a prank, someone nearby, someone who saw him and decided to have fun with a tourist photographing an old phone booth. That had to be it. And yet, he couldn't shake the unease. The way her voice had sounded so real, so terrified. As Daniel turned to leave, his camera still hanging from his neck, a soft buzz startled him. He looked down at the payphone again. Though the receiver hung still, the digital screen, cracked and almost unreadable, now displayed a faint message glowing green through the dirt. It read, 11:59. Don't be late. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He stepped back, staring at the phone as if it might come alive again. He wanted to walk away, to head straight back to his Airbnb, lock the door, and pretend none of this had happened. But a part of him knew he wouldn't, because as he turned his head once more toward the street, he noticed something impossible. At the far corner, near the shadow of the abandoned store, a man was standing perfectly still. His figure was tall, motionless, and though the light didn't reach his face, Daniel could feel the weight of his gaze. And then, without moving closer, the man raised his hand, slowly, pointing directly at Daniel. Daniel's chest tightened as the silence stretched between him and the motionless figure at the corner of the street. The only sound was the faint rattle of a loose street sign caught by the night breeze. He told himself he should just walk away, pretend the phone never rang, but his legs refused to move. The man's arm remained outstretched, his finger unwavering, as if he was pointing not just at Daniel, but at something inevitable, something Daniel was already part of. He blinked, and for a moment the figure seemed to blur with the shadows. When his eyes refocused, the man was gone. The corner was empty, nothing but the glow of a flickering lamp and the dark outlines of buildings that hadn't seen business in years. Daniel rubbed his forehead, exhaling sharply. Jet lag, exhaustion, the influence of late night bourbon from the bar earlier. Anything could explain what he thought he saw. He tightened the strap of his camera across his shoulder and forced himself to walk, each step echoing against the concrete. By the time he reached his Airbnb on Chicon Street, it was nearly 10:15 p.m. The small one-story house had the charm of an old Austin neighborhood home. Paint chipping from the wood panels, a rusty porch light, and creaking steps. He unlocked the door, stepping into the faint smell of cedar and dust. The place was silent except for the occasional hum of traffic in the distance. He set the camera on the table, poured himself a glass of water, and tried to shake the unease that clung to him. Yet as he scrolled through the photos on his camera, his heart skipped. Every image of the payphone looked normal, except for the last one. In that shot, just behind the booth, blurred but unmistakably present, was the shape of a man, tall, lean, standing at the corner of the frame, pointing. Daniel nearly dropped the camera. He shut it off and pushed it away, telling himself it must have been a trick of light, a smudge, or a shadow caught at the wrong moment. Still, the memory of that green glowing message on the payphone display pressed into his thoughts. 11:59. Don't be late. By 11 p.m., Daniel gave up on sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dark window, replaying the woman's voice in his head. Her whisper wasn't the kind you easily forgot. It was fragile, desperate, as though she was speaking from a place he couldn't imagine. Finally, against all logic, Daniel found himself reaching for his coat. His body moved before his brain could stop him. Curiosity had turned into a pull, something stronger than fear, something almost magnetic. He stepped outside, the night colder now, the air filled with the faint scent of damp earth. The streets were nearly empty, as he retraced his steps back toward the abandoned corner store. His watch ticked past 11:30. Every block closer made his heartbeat louder. He told himself he would just pass by, glance once more at the booth, and then return to bed. But when he arrived, the booth was waiting, exactly as he left it, receiver dangling, glass scratched. Yet this time, there was no silence. The phone was already ringing. The sound pierced through the still night, mechanical and relentless. Daniel's feet moved forward on their own. He lifted the receiver, pressing it cautiously to his ear. The same voice greeted him. The woman. This time her words came faster, more urgent, almost panicked. "Michael, please, they're coming. You don't have much time." Daniel swallowed, his throat dry. "I told you, my name isn't Michael. Who are you? What is this?" There was static, and for a moment he thought she had gone. Then her whisper returned, trembling. "If you're not Michael, then you're not supposed to be here. But they will come for you now." Before he could reply, a deep metallic screech rang out from the other end, like iron scraping against stone. The line went dead. Daniel lowered the receiver slowly, his hand trembling. The street around him felt different, thicker, heavier, as though the air itself had shifted. Then, from behind, he heard it. Footsteps. Measured, steady, deliberate. He turned sharply. At the end of the street, half hidden beneath the broken glow of a lamppost, stood the same man he had seen earlier. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face still lost to the shadows. Only now, there was no mistaking it. He was real. Daniel's breath quickened. He stepped back, but the man didn't move closer. Instead, he simply raised his arm again, pointing at Daniel with the same slow, deliberate motion. And then the phone rang again. The sound jolted through Daniel, forcing him to spin back toward the booth. He hesitated, torn between running and answering. His instincts screamed at him to leave, yet something deeper, curiosity, dread, or perhaps a force not entirely his own, made him grab the receiver once more. This time, the voice was different. Not the woman. It was a man's voice, rough, distorted, as though spoken through layers of static. "You shouldn't have answered," it said. Daniel's grip tightened on the receiver. "Who are you?" he demanded. The voice chuckled, low and harsh. "You'll see soon enough. Midnight is close." The line clicked, and silence filled the air again. Daniel staggered back, his mind racing. Midnight. 11:59. The warning on the screen. He glanced at his watch. 11:46. The man at the corner had not moved, still pointing, still watching. Daniel's chest heaved as panic finally overtook his curiosity. He turned and ran, his footsteps pounding the cracked pavement as he fled the street, the booth, the shadowy figure. He didn't stop until he reached the front door of his Airbnb, slamming it shut behind him and locking it twice. His hands shook as he leaned against the door, his heart hammering so loud it drowned out the silence of the room. But then came the sound, a faint ring. Daniel froze. The payphone was blocks away, yet the ringing was clear, as though it was inside the house. He turned slowly, every muscle rigid. On the small wooden table beside his bed, his cell phone screen was black, yet the sound grew louder, unmistakable. He stepped closer. The sound wasn't coming from his phone. It was coming from the wall. His eyes widened. Embedded in the plaster, faint but visible in the dim light, was the outline of a metal plate. A payphone, impossibly old, fused into the wall itself. Its receiver shook, trembling as it rang. Daniel's stomach dropped. He couldn't breathe. He staggered backward, but the ringing continued, louder, faster, more insistent, until finally, against every fiber of his will, he reached out. His hand brushed the receiver, and instantly, the room went dark. The lights cut out. The hum of traffic vanished. The world outside his window fell silent. He was no longer in his Airbnb. He stood in a narrow corridor, damp and cold, lined with peeling wallpaper and buzzing fluorescent lights overhead. The payphone was still in his hand, but when he lifted it to his ear, there was no static, no voice. Only breathing. Slow, heavy breathing, just inches away. And then a whisper, lower than before, almost inside his head. "You're late, Michael." Daniel's throat tightened as the whisper echoed inside his skull. He spun around, trying to see where the voice was coming from. But the corridor stretched endlessly in both directions. The damp smell of mold clung to the air, mixed with something sharper, metallic, like rust or blood. His grip on the receiver trembled, as if the plastic itself was alive beneath his fingers. He wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, but his voice caught in his chest. Instead, he whispered the only thing that came to his mind. "I'm not Michael." For a moment, silence pressed heavily around him. Then the voice came again, softer this time, almost amused. "You are now." The line went dead, but the receiver didn't stop humming. It vibrated faintly, like a living thing, forcing Daniel to drop it. The payphone swung against the wall, clattering once before it stilled. He stepped backward, his shoes squeaking against the damp floor, his eyes darting up and down the corridor. A faint flicker of movement caught his attention. At the far end of the hall, under the weak buzz of the overhead lights, a door creaked open just slightly. From within, he thought he saw a figure, small, hunched, and unmoving. He blinked, and the door was closed again. Daniel's pulse thundered. He turned to the other end of the corridor, but that too had changed. The space seemed longer now, stretched unnaturally, the lights further apart, the air colder. He could feel the temperature dropping, his breath fogging in front of his face. Then came the footsteps again, slow, measured, heavy. His chest seized with dread as the sound grew closer from the far side of the corridor. The same rhythm he had heard on the street, the same deliberate weight pressing into the silence. He backed away, eyes fixed on the dim figure approaching, a tall outline, shoulders squared, face swallowed in shadow. "Stay away," Daniel croaked, his voice breaking. "I don't know who you think I am." The figure stopped. For a long, terrible moment, the silence stretched. And then, in a voice that was neither the woman's nor the distorted man's, but something deeper, almost inhuman, it spoke. "You answered. That is enough." The overhead lights flickered violently, plunging the hall into alternating flashes of light and shadow. Each flicker seemed to pull the figure closer. One moment it was 20 feet away, the next it was 10. By the time Daniel realized he was cornered, the figure stood only a few feet from him. Its face remained obscured, but its hand reached out, long fingers pointing straight at him, the exact gesture he had seen on the street. Only now, that finger was inches from his chest. The ground beneath Daniel vibrated. The corridor groaned like a living thing, walls trembling as if about to collapse. His ears filled with a rush of static, the sound of dozens of voices whispering at once, each one overlapping, impossible to decipher yet clawing at his mind. He squeezed his eyes shut, and then Just as suddenly, it all stopped. When he opened them, he was standing back on East 6th Street. The night was quiet again. The air was cool, the street lamp steady. The payphone was there against the wall of the abandoned store, exactly as before. The receiver dangled, swaying gently in the breeze. Daniel staggered back, his chest heaving, unsure if what he had experienced was real or some hallucination. His watch read 12:03 a.m. He had missed the deadline, and yet the world seemed unchanged. Cars passed distantly. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Perhaps it was all in his mind, some trick of exhaustion and fear. He clung to that thought, desperate to believe it. But when he turned toward his Airbnb, his stomach sank. Across the street, leaning casually against a lamppost, was the man. The same figure, still pointing. This time, however, Daniel wasn't alone. From the shadows of the alley behind the booth, several more figures emerged. Men, women, their faces pale and indistinct, their eyes black hollows reflecting no light. They surrounded the booth, their heads tilting in unison as they fixed their gaze on him. Daniel's knees weakened. He stumbled backward, his breath shallow. The figures said nothing, yet their presence pressed on him like a physical weight. One of them stepped forward, a woman in a torn dress, her hair matted and damp, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You weren't supposed to answer." Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His body screamed at him to run, yet his feet wouldn't obey. Another voice rose among the figures, low and guttural, speaking words he couldn't understand. The payphone began to ring again, shrill and urgent, louder than ever before. Daniel's chest pounded as he realized the sound wasn't just coming from the booth anymore. It was echoing from every direction, from street corners, from alleyways, from the very walls of the buildings around him. The city itself seemed alive with the sound of ringing phones. He clamped his hands over his ears, but it didn't help. The ringing was inside his head now, vibrating through his skull. His knees buckled, dropping him to the cracked pavement. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the ringing stopped. The silence that followed was worse. He lifted his head, sweat dripping down his face. The street was empty. The figures were gone. The man with the pointed finger had vanished. Only the payphone remained. The receiver dangled, swinging lightly as if someone had just let it go. Daniel staggered to his feet, his heart still hammering. He didn't dare touch it again. He turned and ran, not stopping until he reached the safety of his Airbnb, slamming the door shut behind him. For hours, he sat in the dark, every creak of the house making him flinch, every shadow a potential figure waiting to reveal itself. At some point, exhaustion overtook him, and he collapsed into uneasy sleep. When he woke, sunlight streamed through the window. The house looked ordinary again, the world outside filled with normal morning sounds. For a brief moment, he almost convinced himself it had all been a dream, until he looked at the table beside his bed. His cell phone sat there, screen glowing faintly though he hadn't touched it. Across the screen, in green letters that looked disturbingly familiar, was a message. 11:59. Tonight. Answer. Daniel's stomach dropped. He didn't remember setting his phone down there, and he certainly didn't type that message himself. The day stretched long, filled with restless wandering. He tried to distract himself, walking through downtown Austin, photographing murals, eating at food trucks, listening to live music on South Congress. But no matter how busy the streets were, how alive the city felt, the unease gnawed at him. Everywhere he went, he felt watched. In reflective windows, he caught glimpses of shapes that weren't there when he turned. In the crowd, he swore he saw the tall man's silhouette at least twice. Once, near the state capitol. Again, near Lady Bird Lake, standing on the opposite shore. As night fell, Daniel returned reluctantly to his Airbnb. He knew the message was real. He knew the call would come again. At 11:58, the silence in the house grew unbearable. He sat on the bed, staring at his phone, sweat trickling down his neck. His heart pounded so loudly it was all he could hear. Then, right on time, it rang. Not the ringtone he had chosen, not a sound any modern phone should make. It was the sharp, metallic clang of a payphone. Daniel stared at it, paralyzed. The glow of the screen painted his face in an eerie green light. It read only one word: answer. His hand hovered above it, trembling. He knew if he picked up, he would be pulled deeper into whatever had chosen him. If he didn't, he feared something worse might come. The ringing grew louder, rattling the room, vibrating the floor. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut, took a deep breath, and pressed the green button. "Hello," he whispered. The line was silent for a heartbeat. Then a chorus of voices, men, women, children, layered over each other like 1,000 echoes, whispered the same phrase in perfect unison. "You belong to us now, Michael." And in the reflection of the darkened window beside his bed, Daniel saw them. Dozens of figures standing behind him, their hollow eyes fixed on his back. Daniel couldn't move. His body was frozen, every nerve screaming, but unable to react. He stared into the dark reflection of the window, the faint outline of his face illuminated by the green glow of the phone in his hand. Behind him, the figures stood motionless, some tall, some small, some twisted in unnatural postures, as if broken bones had never healed correctly. Their hollow eyes burned into his back, yet none of them moved. The voices on the phone repeated the same words again and again, the sound filling his head until it was all he could hear. "You belong to us now, Michael. You belong to us now, Michael." Daniel's hand trembled as he lowered the phone, his breath shallow and ragged. He dared himself to turn around, to face them, to prove to himself it was just his mind playing tricks. But when he spun suddenly, heart hammering, the room was empty. The air was still. The walls, the floor, the table, all normal. His phone slipped from his fingers, clattering against the wooden floor. The screen went black. For several minutes, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, gripping his knees, trying to steady his breath. He told himself over and over that he was losing touch, that it was the exhaustion, the jet lag, perhaps even some strange illness. But the weight in his chest told him otherwise. Something had followed him back from that payphone. By dawn, he had made a decision. He needed to leave Austin. Whatever this was, it had started here, and he refused to stay another night. At 9 a.m., he stuffed his clothes into his suitcase and booked the earliest available flight back to London. The soonest he could leave was 5:45 p.m. from Austin, Bergstrom International Airport. That gave him less than 9 hours to survive. The day stretched painfully slow. He left the Airbnb early, dragging his luggage behind him, unwilling to spend another second in that house. The streets were already alive with the sounds of traffic, honking cars, people spilling out of cafes with their morning coffees. Yet Daniel felt cut off from all of it. Everyone else lived in a world untouched by the terror pressing down on him. He kept his eyes open, scanning every corner, every alley, every reflective window. Once, as he crossed East 11th Street, he froze. There, across the road, standing in the shadow of a mural, was the tall man again. Pointing, Daniel's throat tightened, his palms slick with sweat. He pushed himself to keep walking, ignoring the urge to run. He told himself if he could just reach the airport, everything would be fine. By early afternoon, he found himself sitting in the corner of a busy diner near Riverside, his suitcase tucked under the booth. The chatter of families and the clatter of plates gave him a false sense of safety. He ordered black coffee he barely touched, staring at the clock on the wall. At exactly 2:17 p.m., the phone on the wall behind the counter rang. It was one of those old landline phones, red plastic, mounted high where the servers could reach it. Daniel's stomach dropped. He knew the sound, the same metallic clang as the booth on East 6th. The waitress frowned, wiped her hands on her apron, and answered. "Hello." Her expression shifted almost immediately, her face draining of color. She turned toward Daniel, her eyes wide as though she had just been told something terrible. Daniel's blood ran cold. He didn't wait to see what she would say. He grabbed his suitcase and bolted out of the diner, leaving a few crumpled bills on the table. His chest heaved as he stumbled into the daylight, the sound of his own pulse pounding in his ears. The ringing followed him. Every time he passed a building, every time he neared a corner, he heard it faintly, sometimes from inside a store, sometimes from a phone box long abandoned, sometimes from nowhere visible at all. By the time he reached the airport, sweat soaked through his shirt. He checked in, passed security, and sat at his gate, his leg bouncing uncontrollably. He clung to the thought that once he was in the air, thousands of feet above the ground, whatever this was would finally let him go. But as 5:30 approached, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He hesitated before pulling it out. The screen glowed green again. No caller ID, just one word. "Answer." Daniel's throat tightened. He pressed the power button, turning the phone off completely, and shoved it deep into his bag. He refused. He would not answer again. When his boarding group was called, relief flooded through him. He walked down the jet bridge, his suitcase rolling behind him, the chatter of fellow passengers a dull hum in the background. He found his seat by the window, buckled in, and exhaled shakily. The plane door shut. The safety demonstration began. The engines roared to life. And then, faintly, beneath the announcements, he heard it. A phone ringing. His stomach flipped. He turned his head slowly, scanning the rows. Passengers fiddled with their seatbelts, scrolled through their phones, talked quietly to each other. No one else reacted. The ringing grew louder. It wasn't coming from the cabin speakers. It was coming from beneath his seat. Daniel's hands shook as he bent down. There, wedged between the seat frame and the floor, was a small black payphone receiver. Its cord snaked impossibly into the metal. The receiver vibrated, glowing faintly green. The flight attendant's voice echoed overhead, reminding passengers to turn off their electronic devices. The engines roared louder. The receiver rang again, deafening now, vibrating the entire row. Daniel's fellow passengers still didn't react, their faces blank, as though none of them could hear it. Daniel's breathing quickened. He squeezed his eyes shut, pressing his palms to his ears. He wouldn't touch it. He wouldn't answer. But then, through the ringing, came the whisper. Not from the phone, from directly behind his ear. "You belong to us, Michael. Answer." Daniel jerked upright, his heart nearly bursting from his chest. The man was seated across the aisle now, tall, dark, face still obscured, finger pointing straight at him. None of the other passengers seemed to notice. The phone screamed beneath his seat. The overhead lights flickered. The engines roared, then sputtered, and then everything went black. For a long moment, there was nothing. No sound, no light, no motion. Daniel floated in emptiness, his thoughts the only thing keeping him tethered to existence. When the world snapped back, he was no longer on the plane. He stood once again on East 6th Street in Austin, Texas. The night air was cool, the lamps flickering. The payphone stood waiting against the wall of the abandoned store. The receiver dangled, swinging gently. His watch read 11:59. The phone began to ring. Daniel's chest rose and fell in quick bursts. He stepped forward, unable to stop himself. Every muscle resisting, yet every step dragging him closer. He reached out, his hand trembling, the cold metal brushing his fingertips. Behind him, he heard the voices. Dozens, hundreds, surrounding him in the dark. Men, women, children. The same words, over and over, in unison. "You belong to us now, Michael." The receiver touched his ear, and the world dissolved into static. Under the weight of the Texas night, Marcus and Daniel felt the city shift around them. The silence that followed the payphone call was heavier than before. Every car that passed, every set of headlights that glanced off the worn glass walls of the bus stop seemed to press closer on their nerves. Austin wasn't a city that ever truly slept, but here, at the edge of East 11th Street, where the street lamps flickered and the bars had emptied, the world felt abandoned. Daniel tugged his jacket tighter around his chest, his eyes never leaving the old payphone. Its receiver still hung limp from the metal cord, swaying slightly as though someone had just let it go. The machine itself was covered in layers of faded graffiti, stickers peeling at the corners and rust creeping up the edges. It looked like an artifact from another time, something no one should still be using. "You heard the voice," Marcus whispered, keeping his tone low as though the phone itself might be listening. It wasn't static. It wasn't just noise. He said your name. Daniel's stomach knotted. He wanted to deny it, wanted to blame his own imagination, but he knew Marcus was right. The voice had been clear, not loud, not forceful, but distinct enough to send a tremor through his bones. "I don't know what it was," Daniel finally said, his voice uneven, "but it knew me, and it said not to go home tonight." The weight of that warning hung between them. Both men exchanged a glance, each silently waiting for the other to make sense of it. But neither could. They turned when a gust of wind rushed down the street, carrying with it the faint sound of music. Old country, maybe, playing from a bar 2 blocks away. The sound was almost comforting, a reminder that life still pulsed nearby. But it faded quickly, swallowed by the shadows. Marcus shoved his hands in his pockets. "We can't just stand here. If this is some prank, we're letting them win. And if it's not," he hesitated, "if it's not, then maybe we shouldn't ignore it." Daniel glanced toward the glowing skyline in the distance. "You think we should follow what it said? Not go home?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he started walking toward the payphone. The closer he got, the more uneasy Daniel felt. The phone seemed to radiate something, an invisible pull, a reminder that it wasn't finished with them yet. Marcus reached out, and lifted the receiver. For a moment, there was nothing but silence on the other end. Then, faintly, a hum, like the low vibration of an engine idling far underground. He pressed the receiver tighter to his ear. "Hello," he whispered. The line crackled. A voice emerged, low and unsteady, as if dragged across miles of static. "You don't know me, but I know you both. There isn't much time." Marcus froze. Daniel's heart pounded as he stepped closer, straining to catch the words. "Don't go back," the voice continued. "They're waiting for you. Tonight isn't safe. If you want answers, find the bridge. Midnight, Congress Avenue." The line went dead. Marcus lowered the receiver slowly, his face pale under the orange glow of the street lamp. "The bridge," he muttered. "Midnight, Congress Avenue." Daniel's mouth went dry. He knew the spot well. Congress Avenue Bridge, famous for the bats that emerged at dusk in great clouds during the summer. But at this hour, the bridge would be empty, silent, waiting. "What the hell is going on?" Daniel whispered, though he knew there would be no answer. The city around them carried on as if nothing had happened. Cars passed in the distance, a siren wailed several blocks away, and a dog barked from somewhere in the shadows. But for the two men, time had shifted. The night was no longer just a night. Marcus let the receiver fall back into place. "We go," he said quietly, though his voice trembled. "We have to see who's behind this." Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to suggest they walk away and forget it all. But deep down, something told him this wasn't the kind of mystery that let itself be ignored. The voice had found them once. It would find them again. They started walking, their footsteps echoing along the cracked sidewalk. The air was heavy with the smell of damp asphalt, the faint sting of gasoline from a nearby station. As they moved through the quiet streets of downtown Austin, every shadow seemed sharper, every corner alive with possibilities. By the time they reached the edge of Congress Avenue, the city felt different, quieter. The Capitol dome loomed faintly in the distance, lit from below, while the waters of Lady Bird Lake rippled beneath the bridge. The sound of water moving against the concrete supports echoed faintly in the still night. Marcus checked his watch. 5 minutes to midnight. Daniel scanned the empty walkway. No one, just the two of them, the faint hum of traffic far off, and the occasional flutter of wings from a late-night bat. "Maybe it was a joke," Daniel muttered, though his voice carried no conviction. But then, from the other side of the bridge, a figure appeared. The man was tall, his silhouette stretched by the glow of the street lamps. He wore a dark coat despite the warm night, and his steps were deliberate, unhurried, as though he had all the time in the world. Daniel's pulse quickened. Marcus stiffened beside him. The man stopped halfway across the bridge, standing directly under the glow of a lamp. His face was partially obscured by shadow, but his voice carried clearly across the empty span. "You came." Marcus and Daniel froze. The man tilted his head slightly, as though studying them. "You listened to the call," he said. "Good. That means you're willing to know the truth." Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with expectation. Finally, Daniel managed, "Who are you?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket, slowly pulling out something small and metallic. Under the lamplight, it glinted, a key. He held it up between two fingers. "This," he said softly, "opens the door to everything. But once you step through, there's no way back." The key dangled in the still night air. And in that moment, Austin felt like the center of something far larger than either of them could understand. And the bridge, once just another stretch of concrete and steel, had become the threshold to a story that neither of them had expected to live. They stood there, caught between fear and curiosity, knowing that the choice they made in the next few seconds would change everything. The man's hand remained steady, the key glinting in the glow of the lamplight. Daniel swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. "What door?" The man smiled faintly, though it never reached his eyes. "The one you've already started to open." The sound of the river rushing beneath the bridge filled the silence. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell began to toll midnight. And just like that, the night deepened, pulling them further into its mystery. The first rays of dawn broke over the empty stretch of Highway 93, painting the desert horizon in soft hues of gold and crimson. The air was still, heavy with the weight of everything that had happened, as if the desert itself remembered. I stood there for a long time, staring at the endless road, wondering if the night's events had been a twisted dream or something far more real. James didn't speak. He sat quietly in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles pale. The others remained silent too, their faces pale with exhaustion, their eyes lost in thoughts none of us dared to say aloud. The hitchhiker was gone, vanished into the dark night as suddenly as he had appeared. No one ever saw him again, but his presence lingered, not in body, but in the way we felt when we closed our eyes at night. The smell of the desert wind, the flicker of shadows against the headlights, the low, haunted voice that still echoed in our memories. They followed us long after the road had ended. When I finally spoke, my voice was weak, almost breaking. "Do you think he was real?" James shook his head slowly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Real enough," he whispered. "Real enough to never forget." We drove on, each mile putting more distance between us and that cursed patch of highway. But the truth was, no matter how far we went, we carried it with us. That night became a fracture line in our lives. Everything before it, and everything after. And though I tried to bury it, to let time smooth over the edges of fear, sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet and I found myself alone, I would hear it again. The faint sound of footsteps on gravel, a whisper carried on the wind, and the lingering weight of a stranger who should never have been there. That was the last time I ever drove Highway 93 at night. Because some roads don't just take you places. Some roads keep a piece of you forever.